Hey folks, we're back with episode 2 of Raising the Witchborn, and today I'm joined as always by Corey, and we are going to be covering the dwarves today. So episode 1, for those of you that haven't listened yet, will cover the basics of what we recommend in building a general warband, and the next segments of the series are going to be based around faction specific. So today we're going to be covering the dwarves. And Corey is joining us from Maui. So he has taken time out of his vacation in order to make sure that we can go ahead and get this released in a timely manner. So, Corey, thanks for that, man.
Yeah, from a remote location.
In a nice hotel by a beach.
That's all anybody needs to know, right?
Right. So, yeah, I suppose let's go ahead and start diving right into this. So, we are going to be covering the dwarves today. And Corey, what could you tell us about the dwarves as a whole, as far as the faction design and kind of where you were leaning with them?
Yeah, they're really, as you kind of know, Tim, they're really the little tanks, right? They're the best defenders of the game. They have access to a lot of skills that only they can get that are very protective. They tend not to be real agile, but they have some things that make up with that. We'll get into it, like the crossbow. Which is a real leveler, field leveler. And then they tend to be good guys. So if you are playing with the optional spellcaster rules, they get divine magic, which has a lot of great healing. So it's really hard to wound a dwarf, and even when they are, your healer can bring them back.
Right. So they are definitely, as you said, the tank faction. If you want your War Clan to be the survivable one, especially as far as like just taking it on the chin, then dwarves are the way to go.
Yeah. My one of my buddies says he hates fighting against dwarves because it takes so long to take one out. And I'm like, just got to beat them with speed. They're not the fastest. You gotta outthink them and outmaneuver them.
Right. So at this point, it's not, you definitely don't want to get into a battle of attrition. You want to get into a battle of who can grab the most objectives the quickest.
Yep, definitely.
Excellent. So let's, I guess let's start going down the list. So as usual, anytime you're building a warband, you have to have your leader. The leader in this case is the Jarl. So what makes him really unique compared to some of the others?
All leaders have that command skill, which is an automatic reroll for anybody within 8 paces, which is about 8 inches on the ruler. And that's nice. And then the one that you don't really think about, most dwarves have, is the shield skill. In this game, a shield is one of the best defenses you can have, even better than armor, because it blocks 1/3 of the possible hits that are
right
that can hit you. They have stout, which means if they're injured, they recover faster. They have a little bit of magic resistance. And the other unique thing to your Jarl is they're unfettered. And what unfettered means is they can put on the bulkiest armor that exists in the game, and that does not slow them down anymore. Whereas your paladin puts on the dragon scale armor, and now his ability scores have dropped 2, and he's maybe making fewer attacks per turn, and he's not getting around really fast. So that unfettered skill is often overlooked, but huge.
Right. So in a way, this really makes your Jarl like the rock and the hard place all in one, depending upon how you equip him.
You got it.
Awesome. So overall, I've noticed that the dwarves are not that much slower than some of the other factions. There's really only a couple models or model entries that are slightly slower, and that's the Binder and the Carl. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, they're the short, stubby, little-legged guys, and whenever your speed drops below a 6, which is standard for everybody, that limits you in different ways. You can't move as far on your turn. You can't charge as far to make an attack. And it also maxes you out at 1 attack per turn. So even if you're using a quick, fast weapon, you're limited to 1. You're just a little bit of an oaf, you know?
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So in a case like this, the Binder and the Carl, they may not be that good at overall volume of attack compared to everybody else because of the lowered speed. It's more than just movement.
Right, right. And these are guys, they're some of the cheaper guys that you're going to be able to buy for your war clan. You're still going to want your binder because he comes with a skill called Bind Wounds, and that allows him to stitch somebody up after the game. So he's a great guy to have on the team, even though I would never put him in combat. I'd use him for support.
Right. So in a case like this, like the binder and the Carl, we talked about them a little bit prior to us jumping on. Now the Carl is a little bit different though. Like you kind of want him somewhat up into the mix a little bit because he comes with a pretty decent defense right off the bat. He's got resistant, shield, stout. His speed's a little lower, but he's also got the engage skill.
Yeah, and engage is nice because it allows him to tangle up opponents and ignore their shield or parry skill and just get in there and give them, you know, what for.
Gotcha. Okay. So with that, one of the things I did mention, because a lot of people that I've played with in the past that are always like, well, the dwarves are so slow compared to some of the other ones out there. How do I get across that? Well, because of the fact that like the binder it's definitely, I would almost say, a cheap necessity for the dwarves. Give the binder a crossbow. Let him, you know, if he has to be, he or she, you know, whatever your model choice is, if they have to be attacking, let them do it at range. Their agility is only a 2, but if they hit, it's better than not being able to get in there and do anything anyway.
Yeah, and the crossbow is the big evener of the game, right? Because it guarantees in the game the goal is to get as many attack dice as possible. It ups your odds. You roll multiple dice, you take the best result. You're hoping for a critical hit. A crossbow always guarantees you 2 attack dice when you're shooting it, which is way better than you do with any other kind of missile weapon if you're a dwarf, because you're not super agile to begin with.
Right. So, and I forget exactly how much is the crossbow to begin with for the dwarves?
There's 2 types. There's the 8 gold piece regular crossbow, which has a range of long, which is about 12 inches. And then you can get the very long with the heavy crossbow. It's about 20 inches. So you figure half the map with that heavy crossbow. Right. But you're going to pay for it. It's 13 gold. So
right.
You're gonna,
exactly.
You're going to pay for that range.
And yeah, and I could definitely see that.
The other option with your binder that I kind of like is give them a ballista. A ballista is really expensive and really inaccurate, but it can reach any spot on that battle map. So,
right, as long as they can see their target.
As long as you can see the target, you can aim for them, and it also affects a larger area than just one guy. It may get a group clustered together. So when people see that ballista sitting out there, they're in a panic mode.
Right, and I completely understand why. It's actually pretty funny that somebody would do that, but, you know, hey, why not? If you got the money for it later on, I would go with it. But, yeah, I mean, kind of going back to what we were saying right from the beginning, I think that the binder is probably the best option for a binder is spend 8 gold, get it a crossbow, at least in my personal opinion.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I'm looking at one of my war clans, and that's how I started my dwarf. Another thing that you're going to want to do with your Carl is they can help out some of your better fighters, your Jarl and your Dragon Hunter and your Axe of the Jarl. And there's a great skill that is really overlooked. And when you level up, take Shield Wall. And what Shield Wall does is when 2 or more dwarves are standing next to each other, and they both have the Shield Wall skill, their defense is increased by 3 points. Now,
wow.
you can see, like, unarmored dwarf is a 5 defense, so taking him up to an 8 is a huge leap. That's the equivalent of putting leather armor on him.
Right, which is pretty crazy just for him standing there essentially nude.
Yeah, yeah. And so what I find myself doing a lot of times is I'm going to dedicate to melee, and I'm going to give them the shield wall skill, maybe even as their first skill. And they can go out in pairs or they can bunch up, however, situation dictates. But you're automatically getting that much greater defense.
Right. So in a case like that, I believe with shield wall, you need the shield skill to use it, correct?
You do. It's sort of a prerequisite. So you've got to buy a shield, have the shield skill, and then you can get the shield wall. You can take a peek. Let's see if it'll show up there. My Jarl, he's got 11 games in, and he's got plate mail because of that unfettered skill. It's not going to slow him down. And right up there next to it, I put a little +3 to say whenever that shield wall is engaged, he goes from a 12 to a 15 defense.
Right. So as far as that goes, let's kind of talk like some nasty stacks here. So the big thing that I'm noticing is that, like you said, with a shield, you need the shield skill, and you need a shield in order to essentially block what would be 16% of the dice results.
Correct.
Because on the dice, there's an oops, which you never want to roll. There are 2 misses. There is a shield, there's a parry, and a critical.
Correct.
So if you do not have a shield, somebody still hits you on if they roll a hit with the shield symbol. So if you have the shield skill, then at that point you're using your shield to block it. So by taking shield and shield wall, not only are you eliminating like a good chunk of them being able to hit you in the first place, but you're also stacking that armor even higher. So even if they do manage to finally hit you, they're going to have an even harder time doing any damage.
Yeah.
And that's right off the bat.
That's the key. I think you pointed this out in the last episode. There's no hit points in this game. So defense really matters in this game, right? Because if you get injured, you're staggered, stunned, and then wounded. There's no magic, I have 50 hit points to protect me. It's truly my armor and my skills, like shield, that are protecting me from being hit in the first place. And then my armor is protecting me from your sword slash, penetrating into my skin.
Right. So in a case like that, right off the bat, I would say estimate 2 games in. If you are taking people that already have shield and giving them shield wall and just doing that stack by about 2 games in, I don't want to say that you have an almost unkillable force, but people are definitely going to have an uphill battle dealing with you if they have to deal with you.
Yeah, it's a real way to dominate early because, let's face it, armor is expensive. Earning a skill is free, right? So it's just as you go through games, you may want to take shield wall on a couple guys really early on and get that bonus.
Right. And a lot of people are going to argue the fact that, well, if I take shield wall, then I can't take some of the bigger, nastier dwarven 2-handed weapons, or I can't have the shield and like a crossbow equipped at the same time and things like that. And that's perfectly fine. Dwarves have other answers for that. It's called a throwing axe. So, I mean, if you really needed to have range on somebody who is effectively part of a shield wall, the throwing axe will work just fine.
Yep. And when you get a little richer, you can even step up to that throwing hammer. Right. And it doesn't look sexy right off the bat, but there's a skill that only dwarves can learn called hammer, and that increases your attacks per turn with things like throwing hammers or that giant long 2-handed long hammer or those kind of skills too. So there's a lot of things built in there to balance out their lack of speed while wearing heavy armor and shields,
Right. So one of the other things I wanted to bring up as well, and this is something that I've noticed is a unique dwarf trait to at least one weapon, because a lot of people, they start looking at it and saying, okay, so the crossbow is 8 gold. So if we break this down, if people spend all 90 gold in order to buy their first 8, they are now spending 35 of their 125 in order to equip. So if they go right off the bat, okay, I need to buy shields for people. Shields, I believe, are what, 1 gold piece a piece for the basic. I'm going to buy a crossbow for my binder. So I'm already at that point, if we're statting it all out, I'm down 16 gold. What do I use for weapons that make sense? one of the weapons to me personally that I think is one of the better ones that the dwarf has, it may not be the most over the top crazy, but for beginning games, it's great, is the Warhammer. For the sheer sake that you cannot be disarmed on a Warhammer, regardless if it's an oops or not.
Yeah, it's really handy. And then we were just starting about how skills stack
Yes.
with things like Warhammer. And what's really important to think about is Warhammer's a blunt weapon, and dwarves are especially good with blunt weapons. They have a unique skill they can earn called Thump. And Thump allows them to add +2 to damage with their Warhammer or any other blunt weapon they have. If you're stacking skills, Thump also works if you end up taking a skill called Shield Bash, and you want to hit people with your shield with one hand and your Warhammer with the other. Now your Shield Bash is doing more damage with that Thump, and your Warhammer is doing more damage with that Thump. But the weird thing about Thump, or the unusual thing about Thump, is it also combines with skills that other war clans can get called Batter and Clobber, which also add damage. So before long, you can be throwing hammers that are blunt, using your Warhammer that's blunt, hitting with your shield that's blunt, and you can have maybe a +4 modifier on your damage rolls just by kind of stacking all those blunt skills together.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and as you go on, then you may be playing in a high-level mage who has a skill called a spell called Stone Skin, and somebody who's protected by Stone Skin can only be hurt by blunt weapons. Well, you've now got the absolute best armor crackers possible there with all your blunt weapons that you've built up. So it's a real interesting balance of how you can start stacking these things.
Yes, very much so. One of the things that I've noticed, just like even from us talking, and I've only played against dwarves a few times, but just by their design alone, they're definitely the punishing faction. So they're not going to be the one that rushes up to get into the thick of it with you. They're going to go up, they're going to absorb that first hit, maybe two, and then they're going to start dishing it back, compared to, say the Norn or the Orcs, where they are going to just be up on your face. Like all of their stuff comes from that initial rush and charge. And we'll talk about them in later episodes, but the dwarves definitely are that slow, steady. You're going to hit us, we're going to absorb it, and now you're stuck.
Yep. And one of the things we always talk about with dwarves is the first time they're hit, they all have that stout skill, which can even take a stun result down to a staggered. And so at that point, usually dwarf players yell, "You're just tickling me at this point, because I'm going to recover before my next turn and you're doomed,"
Right.
And that's where that punishing comes in. And
Right.
with that magic resistance, they even hold up rushing elves, because elves want to pull their little LV tricks on the dwarves. You have a chance to resist anything that they cast at you, whether it's trying to light you up so you're easier target, or they're trying to entangle you or put you to sleep. You've got a lot of protection against them too. So they are really, really durable.
Right. So I guess the next thing to talk about, since we are starting to go more into some of the advanced things that are happening within the different factions, is we didn't really cover this in the first episode, but to my knowledge, every faction has the ability to gain mounts.
Yes, they do. They do. And so when you're ready, you buy your cave bears.
Yes, the cave bear.
You can mount your dwarf on a cave bear, and there is nothing scarier than a dwarf on a cave bear. It is beauty to behold. It gives you extra attack dice when you're attacking melee. As long as you buy a windlass for your crossbow, you can fire your crossbow from the back of that cave bear. And on a charge, that cave bear gets an attack too.
Right.
And And that's not even to mention all the bonus skills that a cave bear gives you.
Yeah, it's got Biggin, Breakaway, Deflect, Fear, Iron Will, Slash, and Tough Hide. So like you stack all that together, and especially like the Deflect, and if you already have Shield and Shield Wall, because all that's working while you're on your mount. Like now you have a dwarf that's already hard to kill on top of a bear that is now just as hard to kill because dwarf is riding it, but he's also riding a bear.
Yeah, it's insane. And that skill Iron Will means the first injury rolled against you while you're riding that cave bear, it doesn't count. It's as if it didn't happen. So
right. So if it does sneak through on that critical and somebody like hits that button and it turns up killed, you're like, nah, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Get me next time. Yeah. So they are, and as you can imagine, cave bears are expensive, right? Because not only do you need the cave bear, you need the saddle. And so a trick that I've kind of taught people is when we talk about support guys, one guy in your group needs the secure skill. He needs to take that as his first skill. And what that does, gosh, I don't know if this is going to show up here, but you can light up your gear, and it's just looking like a slightly darker gray there, maybe.
Yeah.
And all that stuff is protected. If you're secure, it can't be stolen by cut purses or pillagers or a result on the wound deck. There's nothing that can let you be robbed. And so the first thing I did was I knew I was going to want a cave bear eventually, so I had that guy buy a cave bear saddle. And he just carried it around and it couldn't be stolen. And then every game I would put 1 to 3 gold aside, saving up for that 15 gold piece cave bear. But I knew that I had a safe place to put it. Unless my guy got killed, I was always going to have that stuff. And I just built up. And I am next guy who levels, he's going to get the Beast Rider skill, and he's going to have a cave bear. So.
Perfect. So he's just going to come into the next one just with making everybody else crap their pants.
Yes. So
even better.
It took me 11 games. Some people can do it faster, but there was other things that I wanted to buy. I was buying heavier armor first before I bought cave bears. It's just when you want to get to it, but they wreak havoc. They do wreak havoc.
Nice. So yeah, as far as that goes, one of the things we talked about a little bit in the beginning, and we kind of touched upon it in the first episode, was about the spellcasting. So with the dwarf, what are their specialties in the spellcasting?
So they get the divine spells, and what those are early on is they're going to be little buffs that help out your war clan. Make all your guys fearless. Give them all the sanctify. And what that is it causes extra damage with your weapons and triple damage against WitchBorn. So it adds +1 against normal opponents and +3 against WitchBorn. So they hate WitchBorn, so they're gonna destroy them. And then as you go on, they're gonna get better and better healing skills. So second magnitude is bonus touch, and you can't live without that. One of your dwarves can finally get stunned over there, and your mage is allowed to interrupt play and say, I want to go now, take his turn out of order, and automatically heal that stunned guy. So just drives people crazy. They tend to start targeting your mage. So make sure you have them well armored after that.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we're going to start talking about the mages, the dwarf is the one mage where you want him to have heavy armor right off the bat. Because,
exactly.
So some of the divine abilities, I mean, we're already talking about as far as like just straight statistics, one of the most just in a battle of attrition, one of the most unkillable factions in the game. Then you have this wizard in the background that just keeps healing them and making sure that they don't suffer anything, or just they pop back, and it from an early game perspective is disgusting.
Yes, it is. It is. And then they do start to get some offensive spells like Flame Strike. They call a comet down from the heavens to wipe out foes in a large radius. And then, I mean, it keeps going up till 5th magnitude. You can cast the Reborn spell. And so instead of your dwarf becoming Witchborn for dying, you can bring him back to life. And that is huge. This guy that you've built up over 30 games and he's gone in an instant like that, you want a way to save him because you've got a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in that. So,
oh yeah, definitely. And that's one of the big things that is to me, that right there is huge, because after having certain characters die and become Witchborn in game,
yes,
you know, even if it's level 1, even level 1 characters, it's like, well, how much time did I spend, you know, or the level 0, how much time did I spend like calculating how much this guy's going to be worth, and just to have him die and come back and start wreaking havoc. That's a huge ability right there, where you can just say, no, I'm going to bring him back, because then they don't lose the gear, they don't lose skills, they didn't like turn on the rest of your party because it became Witchborn. They just come back to life.
Yeah, dwarves do have, we should mention it, it's a tough skill to get, but dwarves do have a skill called Vigor. And
yes.
And what that allows you to do is redraw 1 wound result. So if that kill does come out, you can go, my guy's got Vigor, and redraw it and pray. It's about a 5% chance of getting a kill, and getting 2 kills in a row is, God, I don't even know the math on that one. I'd have to have somebody smarter than me do that, but it's really, really, really rare. It has happened, but you want that Vigor to be able to redraw that wound card.
Right. I think I would much rather just have an uglier face than being dead.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So, awesome. So, Corey, I think we covered pretty much everything there is to know, at least for the basics on the dwarves. Now, obviously, we'll talk a little bit more later on like advanced tactics and whatnot, but I think this gives so far everybody a good groundwork for if they choose to play the dwarves, starting off at level 0 through, call it level 5, 6. This is probably a good framework.
Yeah, yeah. This will keep you busy for your first 10 games at least.
Perfect. So. Excellent. So, Corey, I'm going to let you get back to your vacation, and thanks again for coming on. And folks, this next time we're going to be covering the elves, so stay tuned.
Yeah, thanks.